Welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're delighted to have Jason Komosa, a former tech exec who turned into a mental wellness coach and just all around cool guy. We're so happy to have you on the podcast. Jason, would love to get an intro from you for the audience.
Yeah, Brian, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate you inviting me on the podcast. And yeah, brief introduction on me. I spent about 20 years doing tech sales, revenue operations, found myself burnt out, stressed out, and needed to make a change. And so I immersed myself into the world of positive psychology, neurology, and philosophy, and ultimately now spend my days coaching folks typically in tech and VC, helping them diffuse stress, detach their self-worth from their work and their money, and delete the childhood trauma they inherited as boys and girls.
But wait, every time I wake up, I look at my bank account and I get happier. I look at my assets under management and I get happier.
I knew we would get along, man. I knew we'd get along.
So walk us through that. When did you know you had to make a change? Because I've been there, right? I worked really hard, got to Wall Street. It's my mid-20s. I was like, this sucks. I don't want to do this.
Yeah, man.
When was that moment for you? And it sounds like you made it further along in your corporate career than I did.
Well, so I actually dropped out of grad school. So my plan after undergrad was to get a doctorate at the University of Chicago. This was when I was 23, 24 years old. Ended up dropping out and joining a very small startup here in Chicago. Again, this was mid-2000s. So it ended up being Groupon. So it was an early employee of Groupon, one of the first 100 employees. I was there for 5 years, went through just tremendous hyper growth. When I left, I think we had about 14,000 employees globally. We went public for $16 billion. So it was just this crazy 5 years of my life. And Brian, you asked like, what was it that needed, what did I identify? Like I need to make a change. It was really when I was about 29 years old, I found myself just severely burnt out, stressed out, constantly focusing all my attention and efforts on work and money, pushing aside things that I knew was good for my health and good for me. But I was so addicted to that work and money that it was like this tunnel vision. And I'd seen therapists before. I never really got what I wanted out of therapy, which was a blueprint. I wanted an action plan. And therefore, that's what kind of kicked off my entrance into the world of coaching when I hired my first coach and spent a full year with him at the age of 30.
That's amazing. And then kind of walk us through, why you were seeking, financial success. I mean, I have my own story about this that anybody who's listening to this podcast or read my stuff has. I have here in my notes that you had a single parent household and
so that
you guys didn't have a lot of financial security and walk us through
that was
kind
it.
of
Yeah.
background.
So I was bred from a world, I grew up with a single mom, constantly stressed about money and not being okay. Like there was some sort of stress involved for most of my upbringing. Right. And so for me, as a young kid, the story I told myself was that when I receive or earn some financial stability, then I'll be happy. Then everything will be fine and all my problems will go away. And so sure enough, I was fortunate to get some financial stability quickly at Groupon. And yet I found myself saying like, well, where is this intrinsic happiness that I thought would accompany the financial stability? Yeah. And I just kept putting this superficial number on it. Oh, well, if I make 200K, then it'll be good, right? And it just kept going up. And it's like, it never ended. And so I found myself, I was depressed. I was empty. I had a bank account that was flush, which is great, but I myself was not thriving. And so I was like, what's wrong? Something needs to change here. And that's when I was fortunately introduced to a guy who just changed, for lack of better terms, changed my life. I worked with him for many years, and he's one of my dear friends. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I got a blueprint. I got an action plan, as opposed to just kind of talking about my feelings. I wanted to get together some sort of a blueprint.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I had a very similar, kind of turning point. I think I was lucky because I'd done some sabbaticals before my Wall Street career, kind of between college and Wall Street. And so by the time I got to Wall Street, I worked really hard to get there and pass the CFA and all that stuff. And it was probably like 6 to 8 weeks in. I was like, this isn't for me. I started talking to guys that were 20 years older than me, and they're super depressed and sad, and they're like, "Don't
Yeah.
do this career. This sucks." Um, and I was finally making decent money, as an analyst. Not much, but more than enough. I mean, more than I
Yeah.
needed at the
Yeah.
time, living in a
Yeah.
little studio loft apartment in New
Hmm.
York. And like, I don't think I want to have this life,
Yeah.
And for me, I didn't get a coach. Maybe I should have. But I just kind of wandered around. So, for anyone listening, kind of walk us through what that that life changing program was for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, truly, it was a year-long program where the analogy I like to use is it's like almost like a tandem skydiving. So it wasn't this therapy where it's like, oh, you come in once a week and we talk and then you go home. This was an immersive program where it was almost like, again, a personal trainer for your mind and your soul. He was with me every other day, checking in, videos, text messages. Like we're having calls weekly. Like we're constantly. I'm just in this modality of immersing myself into all things, again, positive psychology, and really understanding how all of my challenges, which I used to call problems, really kind of stem from childhood, and what sort of information or beliefs was I force fed as a child that ultimately sculpted my beliefs as an adult man. What's so
Yeah,
empowering is that
I just had an epiphany like of my grandparents, basically telling me like, hey, once you have money, you can make your own decisions, and kind of throwing it in my face that I'm a child without money,
yeah,
and how insecure I felt, kind of
yeah.
bouncing around from house to house, and yeah, it kind of messes you up, right?
Well, if you think about it, and it's not our fault. Like it's not your or my fault that we inherited these things, but it is
Yeah.
our responsibility as adult men to say, okay, I recognize that these are some things that I didn't get as a child or that I needed, and I'm going to go out there and I'm going to seek the upgrading that I know I need or want.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, man, it's the main objective is self actualization, right? Closing that gap between where you
Yeah.
are now and where you know you can be. And through that process, healing is often a side effect because you're getting rid of that
Yeah.
old mental gunk, that old outdated baggage that you've been carrying around. Many times, I work with a lot of men, and a lot of times the men are just continuing to suffocate and smother their intuition. They're letting
Mm,
that logical brain run the show, and the intuition, right? They're completely ignoring it, and they're wondering why they're
yeah.
not thriving. They've checked all the
Yeah.
boxes. They've got the money, the job, the family. They're not happy. It's like there's something's missing here. And again, my job is to help them see, like, I was the before, now I'm the after.
Mm, yeah. I love that. Um, what I kept asking myself, I don't know where I came up with this question. Maybe I read it in some self-help book or something, which was, if you had 10 million in the bank or you won the lottery or whatever the number is, and you didn't ever have to work again, money was no object, right?
Mm-hmm.
What would you do, right? And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people are like, I'd travel and I'd build blah blah blah. But like, okay, like what are you building, creating for the world? And I'm often surprised when I ask this question to people and they have no clue, right?
Yeah.
I'd say 3 out of 4, 4 out of 5 people that I ask this question, they look like deer in the headlights.
Mm-hmm.
They literally don't know themselves. They
Yeah.
don't know what they want.
Yeah.
And
And
it was a really insidious question to ask yourself when I was 20. I was 26 at the time. It was a long time
yeah.
ago. Um, and just made me realize like I didn't really know myself and I didn't really know what I
Mm-hmm.
wanted. And
Yeah,
I was
man.
just kind of putting the cart before the horse
Yeah.
and trying to live up to some, Hollywood version of success, working on Wall Street or something.
Yeah.
And not really like listening to like what I actually like to do.
Not living your life like intentionally. You were living someone else's life based upon their expectations or what you thought all these, as opposed to like what feels right to me, what feels
Yeah.
right. And that's a litmus test because really the intuition, Brian, is our future selves giving us clues and extra credit in the present. So if something
Yeah.
doesn't feel right in the present, in the now, it probably is not right. And if something does feel
Yeah.
right, it probably is.
So tell us about that journey, and did you leave Groupon right away, or kind of what was that transition to being a
Yeah,
coach?
this was great question. So it took me. I mean, I'm almost 40. I've been doing this full time for a little over a year, but I've been doing coaching part time for many years. And so when I first started receiving coaching myself, I was so into it that I paid to be his apprentice, and then I went through actual certification, a coaching certification program. This is all while I was simultaneously still doing startup stuff. So startup sales, revenue growth, anything to do with building and growing revenues. So
Yeah.
the way it kind of organically worked is that I would do my full time startup job, and then usually this is before I had kids. From 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. Sunday to Thursday, I would spend my time just working on all things coaching. So it was like going back to
Nice.
school. And
Yeah.
from there, I started just coaching for free. I just was like, I really want to help some family and friends.
Yeah.
Let's just get out there, right? And then eventually, my coach was like, okay, now it's time for you to start charging. And I was like terrified, right? Because I'm like, who am I? And what? But sure enough, it's like the value is there. People want to pay for value, and so I started
Yeah.
charging like very small amounts per call, and then I just kind of slowly, organically would support 2 to 3 men per year, nights, weekends, early mornings, whatever. And
Yeah.
that's kind of how I got my coaching business started. And what really propelled me to do this full time was my wife had a very tumultuous pregnancy. Our second child it was very, very dangerous pregnancy, emergency C-section, and lots
Mm.
of emotional trauma, lots of trauma we went through,
Yeah.
and that kind of propelled me. While at the time it was so traumatic and so scary, I look back now, and that was one of the most beautiful things that ever happened, because not only are they both happy and healthy now, that propelled me to really go in all in on coaching and say, look, like this is what I'm here to do. I have maybe 30 to 40 good years left on this planet. This is where I belong. And so
Yeah.
that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it kind of mirrors my founder journey, right? I tried a couple startups as I was kind of working in tech and didn't get them off the ground. And then, I was angel investing for years, and then did syndicate. And then over time that kind of grew into,
Yeah,
the firm
I
that
love
is
it.
Team Ignite. But it was kind of the same thing, right? Evenings and weekends. And I think it's a good study on, whatever it is that you want to build for the world. Like you just got to get started, even if it's on the evenings and
Yeah.
weekends.
Yep. And for free. Just start it and do it for
Yeah.
free. One of the
Right.
analogies I love
Right.
to use, one of the analogies I love to use, Brian, is like being the scientist. Be a scientist in life. When you all of a sudden, if we put our scientist hat on and we have a hypothesis or hypotheses, and we run an experiment and we realize that our hypothesis is not what actually came to fruition in the outcome, it doesn't make you a bad scientist. It just means
Yeah.
your hypothesis was incorrect. So using that analogy of like, it almost removes this weight and this pressure off of just trying new things, going out there and
Yeah.
having conversations without an expectation of a return, and focusing on the inputs, continuing to focus daily on the inputs and not really worrying or focusing on the outputs, knowing that the outputs are merely an organic byproduct of your inputs.
Yeah. Does everyone need a coach?
Does everyone need it? Yeah. I mean, the reality is I don't know one person in the world that could not benefit from having a coach. Could not, like,
Yeah.
you think about these athletes and celebrities, they have teams of people. They have dietitians and mental coaches. And I mean, right? They have all these people that are supporting them to be successful at whatever they do. And so, yeah, I mean, yes, I believe everyone should have a coach, because
Yeah.
having a coach allows you to really not only get that accountability partner, but you're really being able to be your true, genuine self without judgment, without negativity, with full radical acceptance, and knowing that if I have a feeling, whatever that feeling is, it's okay to have. And that's especially for
Yeah.
men. I think that's something for men. If you were born between 1970 and 2000, you probably did not grow up with the idea that having a feeling was okay. Like one of the lines I love to use for myself and some of the men I support, is I feel blank, and that's okay. I have this
Hmm.
feeling, and that's okay. It's okay to have that feeling, as opposed to having the feeling come into your atmosphere and then treating it with anger and hatred and all these other things, making it worse.
Yeah.
Allowance, radical acceptance and allowance is the way to diffuse those feelings you don't want to have. A lot of men just try to push them away in a corner. That only makes them bigger and stronger.
No, I like that. And the corollary, I think, is everyone need a therapist, and I think almost every therapist has a therapist.
Yeah.
Uh, and then, so do you still have a coach?
Yes, I do. I have two. I'll always have at least one, because for me, I've seen not only like the financial, just pure financial ROI of having a coach, but the daily living of being able to have that person or persons in your life to go out there and just say, hey, here's how I'm feeling. Here's what's on my
Yeah.
mind. By diffusing that out of your system, especially to another human being, and to have those feelings acknowledged, to say, hey, I hear you, man. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Just speaking the truth is therapeutic, right? It's healing. It's helpful.
Yeah. Let's talk through. I'd love to take it from two angles, the founder and the VC angle. So let's start with the founder.
Yeah.
As you work with founders, what are some of the common pitfalls, traps, and issues that you run into?
Great question. Well, across the board, the very first thing I think of is that these young founders. Don't get me wrong. There's old founders too. Founders in general, they are attaching
Experienced.
experienced. They're attaching their self-worth to they themselves. Like their identity is essentially the company. Where if the company is doing well and they're gaining traction and getting good revenues and month over month growth, like things are great. Life is rainbows and cherries. But when things are not going according to plan, and you're not at quota or below goal or whatever, these founders, their lives are in the dumps. Like they're depressed. And so for me to kind of, first of all, we're going to just honor whatever feelings you have, but let's zoom out and realize that your intrinsic happiness, your daily living, is dependent upon something external events. We want to be that neutral middle ground where it doesn't matter what happens externally. I'm the same fucking awesome dude. It doesn't matter. My kids aren't going to love me any more or less if the business is thriving, right? Like it's almost like giving these, especially men, these ideas of like, hey, look, like this isn't the end of the world if you don't hit quota, or a lot of these guys out there, guys and gals, treating work like it's a life or death situation. Like truly.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of is for them, right? Like, they perceive it as such.
It's perceived.
Right? Oh, I'm running out of runway. Yeah. Like and it's hard, right? And there's been discussions I've heard in the industry and on podcasts about suicide and entrepreneurs and things like that, because it can be a very lonely job.
Very lonely
to be a solo founder, or even having a co-founder.
Yeah.
And you have all your investors, you raise millions of dollars, and like you said, things aren't going to plan. We're not growing, growth is slowing, we have to lay people off, and sometimes you just need to, like you said, talk through that with someone. How do you know when somebody needs therapy versus they need a coach?
That's an awesome question. So if we kind of zoom out, there's kind of two main objectives. So the main objective of therapy is healing, looking backwards in time, kind of going backwards into your past history and potentially reliving those events. And ultimately, trauma, what they call trauma, is when if you have a bell curve and the feeling doesn't get processed, it just continues to cycle at the top of the bell curve. That's what trauma is. So again, therapy's focus is healing, looking in the past, whereas coaching, my objective is, again, self-actualization, closing that gap between where you are now and where you could be. And through the self-actualization process, a side effect is often healing, because you're getting rid of that old outdated weight that you've been carrying around. The analogy I love to use is I'm taking a power washer to your brain and to your heart. We're gonna cleanse out that gunk that you've been carrying around, and we're ultimately going to get you on a path, on an actual game plan to get you to where you want to go. Yeah,
I love that analogy. Power washer for the brain and the heart.
Yeah. So that's kind of the main objective. Yeah, it's there is healing involved in what I do, but the primary objective, again, is self-actualization, giving you figuring out what sort of life do I want, what kind of life do I want to live, and then how do we reverse engineer it so that we can move 1 millimeter towards that each day.
Yeah. Yeah. And so let's take it from the VC angle as you coach
Yeah.
VCs like me. What do you typically see?
I mean, it's a lot
them?
of it's a lot of crossover. It's a lot of I mean,
Yeah.
you got the founders that are stressed about, growing their business and gaining momentum, getting traction, money, all these things. It's the same for the VCs. They're under this pressure of like, well, we invested in these companies, they got to perform. And again, going back to what we talked about a couple minutes ago, like drawing a line in the sand and saying, okay, what are the things that we can control? What are the things that we cannot control? Because so much energy is being devoted, especially in venture. Like there's devoting energy and resources to things that are out of their control. The market, we know the market's tough. Like there's no point in you like ruminating about how terrible it is to fundraise. That doesn't help you. That doesn't help you in your cause. It doesn't change the reality.
So let's deep dive into your coaching philosophy. How might you differ from other coaches? What are some different philosophies, and what's your approach?
Yeah, so I would say the core centralized theme of my practice is Stoicism, which again is essentially being that neutral, grounded, regulated self, continuously knowing that life is going to throw you curveballs, and that's going to the mental gym. When life throws you a curveball, that's where you say, okay, I'm stepping up. I'm adding another 5 pounds onto the bench press or whatever. Like that's the mental exercises that we're doing. And so when we know life's going to throw us shit, it's inevitable. Things are going to happen. For us to have the tools and resources to say, okay, XYZ happened, right? I'm going to take a pause before I respond or react to the stimulus. That's where our greatest power lies. We have a stimulus where it's a space, and we have in that space the power to choose how we're going to respond or react to any given stimulus. So
I love that.
Stoicism, I would say, is kind of the core central focus of how I coach my clients.
Yeah, and for the audience who may not be familiar with that philosophy, how would you define that?
So going back Stoicism to like the Roman ancient emperor days, Marcus Aurelius and Seneca and all these leaders from way back when, continuing to have this idea of neutrality and focusing your efforts on what you can control. Because if we I think that would be like, in my opinion, that would be like Stoicism in like one sentence. Focusing your attention and efforts on what you can control, and what you cannot control, it's completely out of your brain. Like it's not even like a thing to think about. It doesn't require you to invest brain energy into.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately, if you follow that to the rational conclusion, all you can really control is yourself.
Right.
Your actions, your reactions.
Yeah, and your perception. The way that you see things.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people getting laid off these days. A lot of layoffs, and I empathize with them. I'm here for them, and I also want to reiterate, like, sometimes you get laid off, and it's the worst thing ever, and you're sad and depressed, and you're angry, and all these things, and then 2 months later, the layoff was the best thing ever because you got a better job, making more money, and a better company. Like, who's to say good or bad? We don't know. We won't know.
Yeah. So let's talk about action-based game plans. It seems to be part of your terminology and your coaching.
Yes, sir.
What are those?
Yeah. Basically, a lot of the folks that I support, I was them, right? I wanted action. I wanted a blueprint. And so each client I work with is a bit customized, but the intention is, how do we get you to actually start doing things? Right? We're one of my favorite techniques is setting ceilings and floors. And so what this does psychologically on a ceiling level, that's the ideal. So you say, like, I'll use exercise for an example. Let's say like my ceiling is a 1 hour workout in the basement. That's like my ideal scenario for a workout. But a floor is the absolute bare minimum that I can do on a daily basis. And for me personally, like, the floor is a 1 minute of exercise. Can I do 1 minute of planks or 1 minute of burpees or push-ups or sit-ups? That's the bare minimum. Now, am I going to
Mm.
burn a ton of calories? No. But the idea is that I'm continuously making progress every single day, not breaking that streak.
Mm-hmm.
So if my daughter's school calls, which they just did recently, and said, "Hey, she's sick, you got to come get her," well, all of a sudden my afternoon is now changed because of my daughter. I'm not going to get angry about it. I'm not going to argue with reality. And the old Jason would have. The old Jason would have been like, "Oh shit, now my whole day's screwed up because I got to go get my daughter. I can't work. I can't make money." That's the old Jason. He's dead. The new Jason's like, "All right, let's prioritize what we need to do, which is family." I was going to say action based. So again, continuously getting people to do things that are small, like start so small. It's like impossible for you not to do it. You want to start writing a book? Can you do one sentence a day? Can you write one word a day in a journal? That's the start. It sounds silly,
like
but yeah, it's just like the market. It compounds. Over time, these little tiny wins are going to progress to these huge macro wins. But remember, it's like focusing on progress and inputs every single day.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, great writers will say that too, right? They sit down and they write no matter what for a certain number of hours per day, and they'll throw away a lot. But it's the practice of just doing it every single day to get through it, and great stuff happens. Like I think there's a philosophy called the 1% solution, 2% solution, something like that, where you just get 1% better every day.
Yep.
And, after 365 days, that compounds quite a bit. It's not 365% because it's a bigger number every day that you're growing 1 or 2% on. So, the power of compounding effort is what you might call that.
Yep, 100%.
What are some of the mental tools you give your coaching clients?
Well, let's see. First thing I like to do is introduce the idea of AM, PM bookends. So if you look at like a bookshelf, right, you have the AM bookend, and then you have a ton of books, and then you have a PM bookend. And those two bookends kind of hold up the books in the middle. And that's kind of us humans. That's our day. We have an AM bookend. We'll wake up in the morning, right? We kind of have the most control in the morning when we wake up. And then right before we go to bed, we have the most control. So throughout the day, we'll have lots of different books. We're doing lots of different things. But if we can kind of own our AM, PM bookends, we can proactively set these up for success to say, okay, here's what I'm going to do between X and Y, X and Y time, 6 to 7 a.m., 7 to 8 p.m., whatever it may be. You're setting intentions. You're saying, here's what I'm going to do. And you do them whether you feel like it or not. Too often, people will let their feelings be in the driver's seat. They let their feelings be in control. And that doesn't serve our highest purpose, right? If I don't feel like going to bed early and I feel like watching Netflix, it's like, I know that's going to hijack my sleep. I know ingesting blue light is not going to help me sleep. So do I feel like going to bed early? Not all the time, but I do it because I know it's good for me.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I've heard that on this podcast with some other guests is, productivity hack that they like is they schedule out everything, right?
Yeah, and if it's on your calendar, you'll do it. You're more than there's a higher chance of you doing it if you just write it down. Yeah, I'm going to do this. This is what I'm doing. I
scheduled a half hour. I'm doing it. It's so important. I'm putting it right there at 10:30 to do it.
If we don't, because here's why. The psychological hack there is when we put that in our calendar, Brian, we say, hey, I'm going to work out. And if it's on our calendar and we don't do it, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to kind of disown ourselves or to say, well, I kind of lied to myself because I told myself I was going to go do this and now I'm not doing it. That doesn't feel good. So when we put it on the calendar, we're definitely more likely to do it.
Yeah. So tell me about some any other mental tools you want to mention?
Yeah. So like AM, PM bookends, I love. Good, better, best is another framework I love to use. So like good, what does a good situation look like? What does a better situation look like? What does the best or ideal situation look like? So using, again, good, what went well, better, what could have gone better, best, what does the best or ideal situation look like in this scenario? And you can use that framework for really anything. I also like to practice or preach the idea of journaling, just writing things down with a pen and paper. So many people are addicted to their phones. They got their phones and their notes and their apps and all these things. I'm old school. I like pen and paper, and it feels good when you write down. When you're just writing, it's therapeutic. Writing down anything, what you feel, thoughts. Like if you saw my office, I'm not kidding. I probably have 10 of these notebooks lying around. I just write down things. I just love writing things, and it makes it stickier in the brain.
Yeah, I love that. So tell me about some techniques for optimizing happiness.
Yeah. Expectations. Let's get rid of them. The very first thing is when you have expectations, typically what happens is we'll have a mental movie that plays in our head that we create. So it's like, I think this should happen, or this is what I want to happen. So we create this mental movie in our head. And then when reality hits and we actually see that the mental movie we created in our head does not match up to what's real, that gap is unhappiness. So how do we get rid of that? We remove the expectation aspect of it. Because when you let go, when you don't have an expectation, you just say, look, I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to focus on my inputs. Your expectations, when they're gone, it's only going to fuel you. It's only going to help you grow quicker and faster because you're not so stuck on this outcome that's not in your control.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of my practice, this idea of like rewiring and kind of unlearning, unmeshing the stuff that you may have inherited as kids, especially young boys.
Yeah, that's so accurate. I think about like watching a favorite sports team. If I expect them to win and they don't, I'm really disappointed.
Yep.
If I expect them to lose and they win, I'm very happy and surprised. And when I have no expectation, I can just enjoy the process, like the Super Bowl, right?
Exactly.
I'm kind of rooting for the Niners, but not really.
You just wanted to watch a good game.
And so, like you just enjoy the process of the game, and I think that's a good analogy for happiness, right? Is like you're just happy like with the process,
exactly,
and not the outcome.
Exactly.
That's drilling into something that I think is really important. When you think about fulfillment and well-being and that's that $10 million question, right? Like, what do you enjoy suffering through?
Yeah.
What's the process that you like to dive deep in, and knowing thyself and creating something for the world, like writing or coaching or starting a company or founding a venture firm or whatever it is for you.
Yeah.
Scientific research, building products, designing things. Everybody has their own thing that they're willing to suffer through and enjoy the process and kind of the journey of.
Yeah. One of my favorite philosophers, Alan Watts, he's from the 60s and 70s. And he's got this analogy of like life is a dance. Like the purpose of a dance is not to like get through the dance. The purpose of the dance is not to go as fast as you can. It's not to go as slow as you can. It's just to dance. The whole point of dancing is to dance.
There's no goal.
It's not to get to the end of the song, right? Or the end of it. It's just to dance. Yeah. And that's if we can treat life like a dance and just say, look, like I know there's going to be challenges. I know there's going to be struggles. There's supposed to be, because if there wasn't, I wouldn't be growing. I wouldn't be challenged. I'd be stagnant and I would be not living. So yeah, it's the idea of like, we're here on this planet again for a very short amount of time. What do we want to do with our time? Because one of the exercises I love to do, you asked about like tools or techniques. One of the exercises I love to do is to go to your funeral. One of the first exercises we do is mentally going to your funeral, and you're watching yourself laying there in the casket or whatever. What are people saying about you? What do people feel? Like, what do you want them to say about you? How do you want to leave this earth? And if you think about that question, it has nothing to do with money, how much money you made, or how many companies you started or sold. It has to do with how did you impact the world? And that is right. And let's reverse engineer it, because we don't want to die with regret. It's the biggest poison known to man, is when you're 91 on your deathbed and you think, oh, I should have done, or I wish I would have done all these things or tried these things but I didn't.
Yeah.
Right? No one's you're on their deathbed. You're never gonna regret the mistakes or the failures you made. You're gonna regret not trying.
Yeah. The risks you didn't take,
Yeah.
typically,
Yeah.
is what they find. You ask anybody in their 70s and 80s,
Yeah.
what do you regret? It's just like, I could have taken a little bit more risk here or there, or could have seen the world when I was younger and more mobile. I heard that a lot. That's why I spent most of my 20s traveling around.
Yeah.
From country to
Seriously.
country and trying to.
Well, Brian, just think about this. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but like think about our generation.
Still on tangents. This is the Tangent Podcast.
It's like, think about our parents and their like my grandparents, like they were raised, like I remember my grandmother telling me stories about eating ketchup sandwiches because they were so poor during the Great Depression.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they ate. And they reused bath water. Like they have one bathtub for 5 people to come in and use the same water. So it's like, there's this generational trauma that has been passed down to us, but it's not ours. It's not ours. We were just handed it like a baton in a race. And so it's like, it's up to us to say, okay, like what can I do to get rid of this baton? Drop it. Because I don't want it.
Yeah.
It's not mine. It's been handed to me from my grandfather to my father to me. And for those listeners who are parents out there, one of your greatest jobs as a parent is to stop the generational trauma that has been existing in your lineage.
Totally. Yeah. I can definitely relate to that statement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lots of generational trauma. So what's next for you? Like, what's your vision for the future, the next 5-10 years?
You know what? So like my 5-year vision, I want to keep, so I completely own my time and energy, which is something that's pretty foreign to me, especially from the startup world, coming from this world of constantly being on Slack and emails and so on. So next couple of years, I want to continue supporting folks one-on-one in groups. But going back to what I mentioned way earlier in the call, my priority is my children and my family. And so knowing that we all have the same bucket of energy each day, it all comes from the same reservoir. And so I'm trying to actually save my energy for my children. So when they're 5, 6, 7 years old and they don't want to hang out with dad anymore, they don't want to play with dad, that's when I feel like I can continue to really put the foot on the gas and potentially build online courses or, there's a lot of opportunity here. But for right now, I'm kind of keeping things small or medium small on purpose because I like to be picky and choosy with who I work with. I want to make sure that I'm giving my time and energy to someone who's going to reciprocate that.
Love it. Let's switch to some rapid fire questions.
All right, let's do it. Yeah.
What book changed your life?
The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday.
Tell us about that.
It's a one page. So let me back up a step. Most books are typically chapters or like these long drawn out. This is the Daily Stoic. It's Ryan Holiday, and it's literally 1 page a day. So like I read 1 page a day. I don't use the tablets. I like writing. I like buying books and marking them up. So this book, again, it's a Daily Stoic. This is like I would say a beginner's guide to Stoicism. And so when you read these books, he's kind of taking the lessons from Socrates and all these Aristotle, right? And he's distilling them into applying them into modern day. How does this rule from 3,000 years ago apply to today in your life of 2024? So that is for anyone listening, like that to me is like it's if you're a human being, you should have that book.
The Daily Stoic. I'll check it out.
Yeah.
What's a morning routine that's non-negotiable for you?
No blue light at least 60 minutes upon wake. So meaning,
interesting.
I used to be the guy like who would turn over, right? And what do? Check my email, check my Slack before I even get out of bed.
Oh,
yeah,
in bed. Oof.
Yeah. And it's very common. This is not like an uncommon thing. So for me, a non-negotiable is like I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not letting my brain do that. And I have 2 young kids. So for me, when I'm up in the morning, it's go time. I got a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. So it's like I don't have time to look at my phone.
Usually they're waking you up.
Yeah, they are. They are.
You're rolling out of bed and attending to the kids. I remember those days.
Yeah, it's my 4-year-old daughter saying, "Dad, I'm awake." Okay, time to get to work. No, I was gonna say that would be like one of the main things for morning. The AM routine is like don't look at your phone. Even when
Yeah.
I come down to work, I have my office here. I don't open my laptop. I will read for at least 15 minutes before I expose my eyes to blue light. I want to read. So that's another an AM, like a non-negotiable. I got to
Yeah.
read.
I like that.
Even if it's 1 minute or one page, I got to read something.
Oh, nice. What's one myth about success you'd like to debunk?
The definition of success. In today's world, Brian, I think across the board, when people say the word success or he's successful, she's successful, what does that mean? That typically means it's just a rewrapped word for money or wealth. Like he's successful. He's got, like, what does that mean?
Power, maybe. Yeah.
Right. Power, status, wealth. Success is not a universal definition. So for those folks who are an NBA blogger and they love basketball and they make $58,000 a year blogging about the NBA and they absolutely love waking up every day doing what they do, that guy or gal is way better off than the stockbroker making $600K a year, hating his or her life, working 70 hours a week.
Yeah.
I would call the blogger more successful.
So maybe
But that's because I define success.
how would you how would you define success? So let's put that into a generalized definition.
I think for me, success is living your life on a daily basis based upon your intentions, not taking just like what's available or what's out there, but truly creating a life on an hour by hour basis where you're doing what you want to do. That's success.
It's like creating value on your own terms.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I mean, really,
I know lots of happy people that make, 50, 60,000 a year doing absolutely what they love, and they live in the middle of nowhere to afford that lifestyle. But they're very happy and engaged and fulfilled.
Yeah.
Lots of unhappy people in the Bay Area making seven figures.
Oh yeah.
Just trapped, just in the grind, in the rat race.
And when does it end?
Lots of, and lots of shades in between those two extremes.
Yeah. Absolutely. But it's going back to this idea of like the money thing. I mean, there are folks out there that are multimillionaires, and like you said, they're not thriving, they're not happy.
Yeah.
They're constantly under this stress and anxiety and pressure, and it's like what's the point of having the money, the financial stability, if you're not thriving?
Yeah.
If you're not truly living for yourself, and especially again for those who have kids, like, are you living a life? One of the questions I love to ask is, are you living a lifestyle that you want your kids to emulate or copy?
Ooh,
because if they see if they see dad coming home and he's stressed and angry or upset, they don't know that it's work or that I'm having a problem with money or whatever. They're like, what do we do wrong here? The household energy, the wife, the kid. I mean, everyone. It's like they're feeling that. They're feeling the stress. We don't want that. So are you living your life in a way that you want your son or daughter to live at age 40? That's a great litmus test question.
So imagine I could give you a billboard on the 101 right in Silicon Valley, a big giant billboard. What would it say?
Oh man, that's a woo! That's a curveball right there, brother. What would it say? It would have 3 words. It would say, "You are enough." You are enough.
Oof, that's good.
Because a lot of men,
I think everybody needs to hear that.
I think a lot of, this is just my personal opinion, across the board, I was raised, my peers were raised, like women and children, they're loved unconditionally. And it's almost like, I don't know if this is how you were raised or how other listeners were raised, but like, I feel like my generation of men, I was born in 84, we have to do something to be lovable. We have to like produce something. We have to sell a company or build a business or do these things to then be loved. Almost like I need to do something to be loved. And the reality is you don't. The men out there, you don't have to do anything. You're just fucking awesome the way you are. There's nothing wrong with you.
Well, we've already won the. If you're listening to this, you most likely are in the United States, so you won right there, or in the developed world, and you're, most of our audiences are men. Probably 2/3. And you're alive. You're a human being in the 21st century. Like that's probably the best time in history to be alive. Yeah. And so a lot of this, one of my favorite practices is that kind of daily gratitude. You talked about journaling. I think being grateful for what you have, I think, is a big part of contentment, right? Mm-hmm. And not losing track, obviously, of the things we talked about, like what do you want to create for the world, the value on your own terms, that kind of thing. But also just, yeah, just recognizing all the amazing things you have to be thankful for. This
Yeah.
is an amazing conversation, Jason. I could have talked to you for another hour or two. How should people get in touch with you if they're interested in
Yeah.
learning more about your coaching?
Greatest way to get in touch is just to look me up on LinkedIn, Jason Komosa, Komosa. LinkedIn me there, add me as a friend. We'll chat. I'm always happy to chat with like-minded folks. So please reach out. And again, I appreciate you, Brian.
Yeah, appreciate you. Thanks for coming on.
All right. Thanks for having me.